from the article I read, it seems, yeah, pretty cut and dry and similar. Just like,
Yeah.
Calling out right now that I'm taking us live, and it just we're live, so this will be on recording. Sorry.
Okay.
okay,
That's okay.
It normally takes like 3 minutes for it to process, and it just processed it way quicker than I expected. My bad.
That's
Uh,
okay.
we still
We
have,
can let.
you want to let people in now?
Yeah, sure. If there are folks in the waiting room.
All right, sweet. I am going to mute up and I'll just be around if you need me. Slack me. I like it's the best way to get me during these.
Okay. Cool. Cool.
Well, let's go.
Got some people trickling in. Some names. Hey everyone. Hey Alex, Marcus, Marion, Kim, Mark, Carter. The early birds here. Happy Thursday to everybody. The Eastern time folk. Happy. I guess at the end of cocktail hour. If anyone has a drink in the background, we're talking debates. If there's any cause for professional politics that has had drinking games attached to it, I think debating is typically been one.
Just also wanted to call out to you, Alex, before we get started. When we live stream to Instagram, you look great right now. You're right in the middle of your camera, but when we live stream to Instagram, you have to be like centered so that everybody can see you. So, you guys are both killing it, but if you choose to move around, you might get half of your head and it doesn't look as good. So,
Let
that's
us
a
know
good
if we're
point.
slipping out of frame.
That's a good point to bring up during the training as well, during the virtual training. Stay centered. Make sure you have good clearance over your head.
We'll get started here in about 2 minutes. Give everyone a chance to trickle in at the top of the hour. Hope everybody's doing well. To the candidates who are actively running, thank you for taking time out of the campaign trail or off the campaign trail to sit in tonight. We're talking debate. Hopefully, a timely thing for you guys as you're tuning into what is, I just realized, the very first day of summer. And with summer brings a lot of campaign activities and typically the start of debate season. Say as well, if you guys have, we'll be running through the whole program for folks who are here early. If you have questions that you want answers to, feel free throughout the program, throw them in the chat. Alex and I will make sure we leave no question unanswered, and we'll make sure we also hold time for Q&A at the end. See more folks trickling in. Ayumi, Michael, Jennifer, Brett. Hope everyone's doing well. I think we can jump in. I'm sure more folks will trickle in, but thank you guys, everyone who's here for joining us this evening. I'm Jared Alper, Good Party's political director. I'm joined happily tonight by a member of our political team, Alex Barrio, who has the experience not only of being a experienced political strategist, but also as a candidate himself, which we'll get into in a few moments here. And we're talking about debates. We've got a good program. Debating, I think, was top of a lot of people's mind. It was by popular demand that we put this program together. And we're going to cover the full gambit of preparing for a debate and all that goes into basically presenting candidates and preparing them for public forums of all different shapes and sizes, from preparing and getting ready for a debate setting to what you do after you get off stage to make sure you maximize the experience. Most folks know me. If you're running for office, odds are you and are with Good Party, odds are you bumped into me somewhere along the road. I want to turn it over quickly at the start here to give Alex an opportunity to introduce himself to those who haven't yet met him. Alex, would love to turn it over to you before we dive in to tell the folks on the call a little bit about who you are and what brought you to Good Party.
Thanks, Jared, and hello, everyone. So, like you said, I'm Alex Barrio. I am a former political operative and candidate from Florida. I worked in Democratic Party politics in the state Senate and the state House, worked on different races, and ran myself for state representative in 2016 and 2020 in the Democratic primary. Unfortunately, I lost, and after that, I decided to leave Florida. Now I'm in DC, and I'm working to help candidates running at that level. One of the reasons that I ran at that level, at the state legislative level, is because I know how important and impactful those positions are and how amazing the power that they have to change your life. And so looking at the political party structure in Florida and around the country, I do think truly that we need alternatives. All the polling has shown it. All of us are already well aware of the need for alternatives in this country. A week from today is the presidential debate between Trump and President Biden. And once again, I think we'll see the glaring need for alternatives there. But it starts at the local level, it starts at the state level, it starts down and then flows upward. And so I'm glad to be here at Good Party to help good candidates get into office and begin to make that change and build this movement to present alternatives for America.
Thanks. And before we dive in, I think a question that might be asked early, we can get ahead of. I've certainly prepared many candidates in my career for debates. I'm sure you have as well. But you yourself, I think, have been in the shoes of these folks, not just running for office, but also in participating in a public forum setting, I would imagine. Do you know off the top of your head how many of these you've run into, or what has been your experience debating in the past?
So in 2016, there were two debates. There was a debate hosted by the Young Democrats of Orange County, where I was running, and then a candidate forum hosted by the local paper, the Orlando Sentinel, which did endorse me. And then in 2020, there was again a League of Women Voters held a candidate forum for us. And again, there was a newspaper editorial board where we had a debate. And we'll get into it, but definitely the newspaper editorial board versus the candidate forum and the more debate style, like it's different style and different outcomes there. But yeah, so four debates across two races.
Yeah, I think it's an exciting thing. I know that when folks are running for office, oftentimes the thing that is circled on the calendar first, or the things that they are most preparing themselves for even further out, as soon as you file the paperwork, is how am I going to appear on the stage and what am I going to say with the cameras rolling? So I think your perspective of being a candidate certainly is going to resonate with some of the folks on this call. Like I said, we've got a lot to cover tonight. I'll quickly break down the whole different points of topics. I'll even post them in the chat as well, so you guys get a sense for how we're going to break this down. This chat box is open to everyone. I'd encourage you, if you have questions throughout the debate, to use it, or throughout the program about debates, to use it. Ask us any questions that you have. We'll make sure we answer. And then at the end of the conversation, we'll hold some time for Q&A so that we can open it up to the room. But we're going to cover a lot, right? Starting with what are the different types of public forums that candidates tend to experience on the campaign trail. Not all debates or public appearances featuring yourself and a moderator or even your opponents are created equally. How do you research, and what are the best practices to prepare for those moments as soon as they get put on the calendar? How do you craft your message to be able to drive home the biggest impact among the people in the room and the people who are watching in your community? What are the skills that you can master to enhance your delivery, your communication delivery and presentation? How do you deal with a live audience, which sometimes is a first for people who are running for office, engaging with a crowd of people who oftentimes will be your voters? And then what do you do after you get off the stage? How do you take the moment and hopefully the momentum that was captured from being in this room with these people with the cameras rolling and really stretch it out for all it's worth? So a lot to cover. We'll dive right in. And I'd love to start first and foremost with the formats and the different types of debates. And my question to you, Alex, is, well, can you break down a little bit what are the key differences between these different types of debates, and what are the most commonly encountered types of public forums that candidates run into?
So the most common types are the newspaper editorial board debates and then the traditional debates. And these are the ones that you're going to encounter. I'll start with the newspaper editorial board debates. because those are usually you don't really see them. You can watch them online afterwards, and I recommend definitely watching them. The key with those is newspaper editorial boards hate attacks. They hate talking points. They're going to limit your answers, but they want substance and they want you to focus on the substance and the subject at hand. They want you to answer the questions directly. They're not looking for you to take pot shots. They don't care about ratings. They're really trying to decide whether or not they should endorse you or your opponent. And they're trying to actually earnestly pick the best candidate in this race. And so the focus with them is to really look at your moderator, whether it's your newspaper reporter, whoever, and just answer the question. And it's really important for that research to read the paper and understand what the newspaper, what they feel about your local issues, right? Because they're going to ask you very specific, well-researched questions about your local issues. So it's almost like almost an idealized debate format, almost an academic exercise as well in terms of actually addressing the questions. The other types of debates, which I participated in, both one hosted by Illegal Women Voters and another one hosted by the Young Democrats. You're with your opponent in public in a forum, and you're answering questions and you're going back and forth, and your answers have to be very short. They usually give you very strict time limits, 2 minutes, 1 minute, maybe 30-second rebuttal to go back and forth. And in those debates, your research is not just about your issue, like your preparation. It's not just about the issues that you're going to be talking about, but it's also about understanding your opponents and the way they stand and really trying to make that contrast between yourself and the opponent that resonates in the audience's mind. And we'll get more into audience in a minute, but really building that contrast, understanding your opponent, understanding why you're running, having a very strong opening statement and a very strong closing statement. You don't need that when you're at an editorial board sort of format. You need that when you're at a debate because you want to start out strong, lay the groundwork for who you are as a candidate and what the conversation is going to be about. And you want to close strong in a way that is memorable to the audience and has them thinking about you and about your name and wanting to vote for you.
I think that's probably the latter. The latter debate format's the one that is sort of top of folks' mind. You're standing on the stage next to your opponent, and you're trying to focus on what you want to say while you've got someone else who's coming in with a game plan as well. There's also, at least from my experience, been different formats for these debates, right? Whether it's sort of a town hall versus a maybe classical debate where you've got two candidates talking direct to the audience or asking questions from a moderator, and increasingly virtual debates where you're not even in the same room as your opponent. Can you talk a little just about the experiences that you've had and maybe how those seemingly similarly sounding things might be subtly different?
Yeah, in 2016, both my debates were in person. In 2020, both of them were virtual. So the difference is when you're virtual, like we're at right now, you want to stay centered, you want to stay focused on the camera or focused on looking at the speaker. And your body language has to be a little bit stiffer. You really got to be focused like a news reporter delivering the news on what you're saying. When you're in a room with people and you're in person, you have a lot more flexibility in terms of physical body language, but you also have to be way more careful about it. And you just have to be way more thoughtful in a very different way. When you're on virtual, you want to be a little bit stiffer and a little bit more confident and sure, staring straight ahead. In person, you want to be more loose, more relaxed, but you also want to be very careful not to look too relaxed. You have to mind your eye contact a little bit more in a different way. Make sure you're talking to the audience, you're talking to the moderator. And you also really have to, broadly for all of them, you always have to check your tone. You do not want to come off as testy or aggressive. And that's really where practice is really, really important, especially if you're asked a question or you're attacked. In all my debates, I was attacked about something. And so when that happens, hearing the attack, taking a beat, maintaining your composure, and it's different virtually to maintain your composure because you can, clench your fists and just let that anger be in the lower part of your body. But in front of an audience, you can't. It has to pass out of you, and you have to stay focused. firm and composed and be willing to strike back and ready in a way that doesn't make you seem a little out of control or upset. So, and then there's also like, clothing difference as well. When you're out there in person, make sure you're wearing your full suit, professional, look professional, act like you're going to be in a lot of photos because you probably will be. But virtual, it's a little bit more casual. You're able to dress a little bit more relaxed and take it a little bit easier in that way. But yeah, there's, you know, especially virtually, like your hands are not really that important. It's easy to hide them. But when you're in person, watch your hands. That is something that is so crucial because you will see people folding their hands, rubbing their hands, pointing, touching their face. You can't do that. You can't do that. You have to really focus. And so keeping those hands usually gripped to the podium because you're nervous. I was nervous, so I had them gripped to the podium. It's just that level of difficulty is not something you don't have to deal with in virtual as much. And so that awareness, you're just on another level of awareness of your body.
Yeah, you brought up a good point, which is I think for a lot of people who've maybe never debated before, it's totally normal to be nervous about stepping up on a stage and answering questions where maybe you are not familiar with the person asking them or you're not totally in control of the experience. I've found that the best way uh, to help settle into a debate setting or a town hall setting where maybe you aren't entirely aware of the questions that are going to be asked. It's just prepare, right? To take some time before in the days and even weeks ahead of the debate to really drill in and work with a team of people, whether they're friends or family, or if you have people who are working on the campaign, to devote some time to debate prep. And one thing I would add, right, is in all of these different settings, generally speaking, the formats are shared with the candidates in advance of that, right? So they will tell you you have time for an opening statement, you have time for a closing statement, you're going to be receiving questions from this person or from the audience directly. All of that leads into, well, how do I get myself ready for this opportunity? So, Alex, I want to talk a little bit about the process of debate prep that you've been on both sides of. I'm sure you've had people telling you how to dress and express your body language and where to put your hands, but I've also been on the other side of trying to help people settle into it. So I'm curious, just what are the best practices that have you've encountered in preparing yourself and your candidate for a debate setting like this?
So number one, make a list of questions that you're going to be asked, that you think you're going to be asked, questions that you want to, that you know are going to be aware, right? And it can be a long list. It can be 10 questions, 15 questions, 20 questions. Make that list of questions and work with your campaign consultants, your team to review those and think about what are the issues that we're definitely going to be asked about, right? And when you're running locally, right? If you're running for local office or state office, you've been out there talking to voters, you know the issues people are talking about. You watch the news, you read the papers, you know the issues people are talking about. So making sure you know those questions. And then first step, answer those questions freely. Record yourself on video and answer them freely. Just a rehearsal. And then write them down and edit. Edit your answers down and get them down because you're going to get time limits from your debate. It's going to be, 2 minutes, 90 seconds, 60 seconds. And edit your question in the way that is essentially begins with answering the question as directly as possible and ends with establishing why you are such a good candidate and why you are literally the best candidate. So if the question is, what do you want to, what do you think about school funding? You want to start with, and it'll be more specific, of course, in the debate, but you want to start with exactly what your opinion is, that one or two question that will resonate with the audience, and that is the mainstream opinion of your community. And then ends with that solution. And so phrasing, reframing, writing those answers down. And doing it across all the topics. It sounds like it might take a lot longer than it does, but really you can do it in a couple days, maybe a day or two, one day to practice, then a day to edit and then rehearse those short answers. But you want to be able to answer any question on any topic with your 60-second soundbite very, very quickly. And if they ask for details, you want to be ready to provide those, but you don't necessarily have to be ready to provide those in that moment. You just want to answer the question as direct as possible. And it takes practice. It takes rehearsal to get it perfect. And I'm sorry, I have like
Yeah,
a close my blind real quick.
I'll add one thing, which is that there is, in my experience, almost like a fine line between being over prepared or over hyped up about the experience, and I'm sure you've seen this too, where the experience of a debate and an experience of a town hall, it's an opportunity, hopefully, to present yourself as you have been on the campaign trail, just in a more sort of organized setting. And so I think that there are moments where candidates sometimes come in over prepared, like they're coming in setting up at an 11, and oftentimes the debate almost under, especially if you're running locally, right? Candidates are coming in expecting a presidential style debate, and it turns out to be a town hall forum where you don't need to dial up the temperature to a 15. It's more just being prepared, being polished, confident in your answers, right? Coming in, having done the work to understand what it is that you're trying to get out of the debate setting, and what do you want people to know about you leaving that they didn't know when they were coming in, and making sure that your answers reinforce that and delivering it with confidence. And I think sometimes understanding that objective, and it speaks to crafting a message, which I know we're going to talk about here in a moment. But Alex, when you were preparing candidates for debates, or you were yourself were kind of getting ready to take the stage, can you talk a little bit about how you envisioned success? Like, what were the objectives that you held going into the debate? Because I doubt it was, I really want people to know my very nuanced, specific position on this issue, versus I want people to get to know who I am.
Exactly. The number one goal you want to get out there is truly, at least for me and with my candidates that I worked with, it was coming off as a real leader, right? Like someone who knows what they're talking about, who knows what they're doing. You want to be like, we wanted to come out as trustworthy. Yeah, trustworthy, knowledgeable, and ready to step into the role, right? That is truly the goal. It's not about what the other person says or does or anything. Like there is a certain point where you have to let that go. It doesn't matter. And you're really standing on your own. And that is the best way really to view, I think, to view the debate, right? How can I come off in a way where the audience says, that's my representative, that's my mayor, that's somebody that I can trust. And that doesn't come from attacking your opponent or complaining about, how many seconds you've been able to debate or you're not getting enough questions if there's a multiple candidate forum. That comes from using the time that you are given by the moderators incredibly, incredibly effectively. And so how can I most effectively message what I want to message so that the viewers come out saying like, that's the person I want to vote for?
And you touched on something I want to tap into, and it might be the political strategist, former hack for hire in me. But I've always felt like the word soundbite gets sort of a bad rap, and that people watch the political TV shows, or they watch these debates and they see the spin room after, and they're speaking and thinking of sound bites as a negative thing. But in my experience, it's really just saying, hey, this is how we're organizing our message and making sure that we're developing consistency. But do you want to talk a little bit about, what is and maybe what isn't a soundbite? Because I think that's a thing people come into thinking and maybe fearing a little bit.
Yeah. I think the negativity of sound bites comes from inauthenticity, right? It seems like sometimes politicians, they're speaking in sound bites because they're saying what they think voters want to hear instead of saying what they actually want. And so a soundbite to me is a statement that very succinctly captures your message or your stance on a specific issue that is memorable, right? That sticks in the voter's mind and says, that's the person who, specifically said, like, now I'm trying to think of a good soundbite of like, said, we need to fund public education. And, that's a generic one, but it's a statement like that where it's like clearly they're willing to step forward. Like it's something that's memorable. And it just summarizes your point. And when you're in a debate and you have 90 seconds to answer, sound bites are your friend because they succinctly summarize exactly what your message is and they get it across. People can remember 90 seconds of a statement. They will not remember a 5-minute policy speech debating the nuances or discussing nuances. They'll remember when you said, you're going to do this and this is why. And that's what a soundbite is. I believe this, and this is why. Vote for me.
Yeah, I think that memorable is the important piece too. What about you can be sort of distilled into a bite-sized form that resonates with people? And I'm curious if you have any tricks of the trade that you would share with the group on specifically how to craft a memorable message, right? If you're coming into the debate stage and you want people to take a few key things about your campaign away, especially people who maybe have never met you or your opponent before, right? They're truly kind of weighing their options in an election. How do you make sure that your message that you're crafting sticks in the mind of people, maybe using a soundbite or really just crafting a message in a variety of forms that resonates?
So, I mean, it's practice, honestly, finding the words. And I'll give you an example. In 2006, I was working for a state representative candidate named Scott Randolph. And while he was canvassing, one of the things that he got consistently from voters, a few of them mentioned this phrase, the character of our community. And that ended up being the heart of his message ultimately. And he won his primary, he was a Democrat, won his primary with 65% of the vote, won the general with 65% of the vote. Really, really great candidate. But he consistently talked about the character of our community. And it ties into everything, right? Whenever somebody would say anything, crime's up. And it's like, yeah, we really got to do something about that because it's affecting the character of our community. Our schools are underfunded. I know we've got to fund them because having good students improves the character of our community, right? Jobs, everything went back to that. And so it became his soundbite, it became his catchphrase, and it became who he was, the person fighting to protect, preserve, and in some cases improve the character of the community. So it's something like that that resonates and that is also organic, right? That is natural. It should be something that you talk about, that you're hearing. It should come from the issues you care about and the reasons that you are running, right? Why are you stepping into this position? Why specifically city council instead of Congress, for example? Like, what are those local issues that are driving? And then framing your statements and the way you talk, honestly, framing your language around what that statement is.
And you touched on one critical thing that I think if there are candidates on here who've spoken to me before, you've probably even heard me say this. But when it comes to being memorable, when it comes to driving your key message home, you mentioned repetition. How important, and maybe even just let's define what message discipline is, and how important is it to be disciplined in your message, especially if you have an opponent, who might be trying to steer the debate in a different direction. And how do you navigate that as a candidate?
Yeah. Message discipline is important because number one, voters aren't going to remember anything. I mean, I shouldn't say anything. They're not going to remember everything you say. They're going to remember something, however. And you want to make sure they remember the thing you want them to remember. And so staying on message, sticking to why you're running, sticking to the issues that you want to talk about is so, so crucial because that is what the voters will ultimately leave with if you're consistent, if you stick to that message. I mean, message discipline broadly is just honing in on why you're running, what your message is, and just repeating it over and over again, and making sure to tie all the issues to that broad issue, to that broad message of why you're running and who you are. Like that level of authenticity, it's difficult to get there. But you can get there and you will get there as long as you remain true to yourself and the reasons for running and you stick to it. And when your opponent, the beauty of message discipline is when your opponent starts to talk about something else, when they try to inflict their message discipline on you and try to talk about issues that are peripheral or that maybe you disagree with them on, maybe it's an unpopular stance, when you're a disciplined messenger, you can always pull it back. And so no matter what they say, you can come back and be like, look, in this community, these are the issues that I believe in, that I'm fighting for, and this is what I'm standing for. And you just, go back to that. This is the character of the community and just focus on that moment and that issue. The message discipline, it also allows you to control the conversation and also keeps you confident, right? Because you're going to be nervous, especially when you're attacked. And it's totally normal. Everybody, from the president on down, when they get attacked, there's a jolt, right? There's a moment of like, okay, I got to respond. Message discipline allows you to respond in a way that is diplomatic, that is dignified, that keeps your composure, that keeps you in control of the conversation and allows you to continue to talk about the issues you want to talk about, which are the issues that you know the voters care about. And they're going to remember that more than they're going to remember the specifics of whatever your opponent said that tried to sidetrack you.
Last point, I think, on message, before we move on to some of the more like in the moment topics that we've set up here tonight, which is the presence of contrast, right? I think an effective debate has a lot to do with defining your election and being disciplined about why you're running, but also being able to define how you're different from potentially your opponent. And I think the line there sometimes gets blurred between uh, contrast in good faith and attacks for the sake of attacking, and also responding to attacks that versus reasonable contrast. Right? Not everyone agrees on everything. It's totally fair game, I think, for someone to tell an audience how they're different from you, but there's a line to be crossed, and sometimes attacks go too far and it backfires. So I think before we move on, and I'm sure it's on folks' mind on this call, Alex, we can talk a little bit about the experience of being sort of shoulder to shoulder with the person you might be running against, and what are the best practices for handling that experience of being able to uh, define contrast and to define the election in your terms without crossing the line.
Absolutely. So when it comes to the difference between contrast and attacks, especially in a debate format, are personal, right? And you want to avoid those as much as possible, even when you are personally attacked. Because if you are personally attacked and you respond with dignity, the voters will remember not that you were personally attacked. They won't remember the attack. They'll remember that that person said something rude and you responded like a real professional adult elected official, politician, somebody who actually a public servant. And so when you're talking about contrast, it avoids personal issues and focuses on the political issues, the issues in the community, right? If your issue is public safety and you're running against an incumbent, in the last 4 years, crime has gone up. You've been city commissioner for 4 years. What have you done to do it? Nothing. That's a contrast. And that's a point that goes to their record. And it puts them on defense, and they might feel personally attacked, but it's not a personal attack. For them, it should be. And if you're an incumbent, it would be for you an opportunity to highlight your record, right? And to say, actually, what I've done is this, 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 and this, right? And that's really the key difference, right? Contrast is all about your record, your vision, your values, and how they're different from your opponent without denigrating them, without insulting them, without it becoming some personal thing. It's not about personality. It's about, look, this is what this community needs, and this is what I stand for. My opponent stands for the opposite. And it's up to the voters to decide which one they want. And you're really letting the voters, when you're creating a contrast, you're letting the voters see you both on an equal footing and make the right decision. And if you framed your arguments correctly or strongly, they will see you in an elevated way over their opponent, and it will be based solely on the issues. And they'll respect you more and they'll like you more for it because they will feel respected by you. When you personally attack your opponent, many voters, and I'm sure we've all felt it. I mean, this is why we're all sort of working on this project to move away from the two-party system. The personal attacks feel insulting. They're an insult to our intelligence. Like, let's stick to the issues. Let's stick to the facts. And when you do that and you build your contrast around those facts, the voters are grateful and they are able to think more, you're a more thoughtful person and it's appreciated by the voters. And so your contrast should be thoughtful, poignant, completely honest and true, and really based on policy and record, and pivoting your messaging back to that when and if you are personally attacked. Just elevates you in the mind of the voter and also elevates you in the mind of your opponent too, because they realize they made a mistake. They stepped in it.
Yeah, I mean, elections, I tell candidates all the time, are ultimately a choice that you're asking voters to make. And if you're an incumbent, oftentimes it's a choice of vote to keep me in this position so I can continue doing the good work that I've been doing. If you're a challenger, it's an opportunity to change the direction in contrast to the way that business is currently being done. And debates are an opportunity to get that message out. Eric asked a good question, which is sort of how do you respond in the moment? And I think if I'm understanding your question correctly, Eric's, to those maybe attacks that cross the line. And I've sort of seen it handled both ways. I think it sometimes tends to be a response to sort of the severity of the attack and how far across the line the candidate's gone. I remember many moments on the presidential debate stage where someone said something so insulting or so egregious that a candidate, and at the congressional level too, including a race that I was a part of, where we almost had to stop the debate and pump the brakes and say, I'm not going to allow this moment to slip because my opponent said something that's so insulting and so beyond the pale that I can't just ignore it. I have to stand up for myself. And it shows that you have backbone, right? You're willing to stand up to someone who's essentially attacking you and saying, that's not how we do business here. There are some times where there are little like jabs that an opponent will slip in that you can almost feel the weight in the room, that it's just rolling over people's heads, and you don't need to rehash it because it didn't really stick, right? If an opponent says something that's sort of under the cover and maybe it offends you personally, but very clearly it hasn't gotten a hold of anyone else's attention, there's almost no worth. It's not almost not even worth rehashing because then you just give life to the attack in itself. So oftentimes it's something that you just feel and you know it when you see it. If someone really crosses the line and you feel like you personally can't let it go, oftentimes it's something that you just know you would never envision saying to somebody else. You can name it, and like Alex said, you can sort of catch your opponent stepping in it and make sure everyone saw it for what it was. I want to pivot away to less on message and more about how do you effectively deliver the message. And there are, I think, a lot of best practices that come in the preparation stage. And Alex, I'd love if you can talk a little bit about when you are preparing for one of these events. What are the sort of the key things that you focus on to manage the moment and ensure that you're feeling ready when you step on the debate stage and confident in how you are going to deliver the message that you're trying to deliver to your community?
Yeah, I mean, confidence is key, and one of the first things you have to do, and it's something people maybe don't think about till the end, wear clothes that make you feel confident. Whether it's a business suit, something that makes you feel confident and professional, because that is a vibe, it's an energy. The voters will respond to it, the people in the room will respond to it, your audience will respond to it. You know, when you're dressed well and you feel like you look great, you feel great, and people can see that. So that's number one, right? Dress for success. And then really, I mean, going back, thinking about the issues you're going to be asked, the questions, and when you're thinking about being rattled, right? Ask your opponent, ask your friend, your campaign manager, someone you know in prep, to ask you one of those questions, right? To literally interrupt you, right? In debate prep, it is really, really important to also prepare for the worst case scenario, because you want to see how you react, right? And you know, let's say, for example, this happens. Sometimes a candidate will have a divorce record, and the divorce record is out there, and it was a nasty divorce, right? And this has happened with candidates all over the country. And there's something in there that is offensive to the person, and your opponent brings it up, right? Bring it up during your debate prep. Go to that place, let them bring that up and surprise you with it, right? Don't tell them do it now. Let them surprise you with it while you're answering a question about, you know, parks and recreation or something, an issue in the community, just to see how you're reacting to it. How do you react in the moment? What does your face do? What do your hands do? What is your emotional reaction, right? So if it comes up, and hopefully those things won't come up, but if a personal attack does come up, knowing what your first biological response is in practice will allow you to ensure that you have an effective response when the time comes, right? Will allow you to deflect and pivot back to your message and also say, look, that's not the issue here. That's not what this is about. This is an unacceptable question. Whatever it is your response is, and you can also work on those responses at that level. But it really comes down to finding a trusted advisor, working with them through questions, working with them through answers, discussing, drafting, and prepping. It is worth taking a day or 2 days. You usually don't need more than that to practice those answers and rehearsing, and also practicing maintaining your composure. And have your your campaign consultant tell them to look up an issue and ask a question that is out of left field. That isn't really one of these questions, right? Are there questions that they think are interesting to ask you about this political process that you haven't discussed, right? Is there an issue that is sort of a peripheral issue, but is still there that they can ask you about, so that you also know how you react to unexpected questions? Because you're not going to know the questions ahead of time. You're going to know generally, like we've talked about, subjects, the topics. You're going to have an idea of what you want to say. And you're going to be able to frame it within the context of your message, but you're not going to know the exact questions. And so knowing how you react to an unexpected question is also really important, so you can practice that pivoting. And in that practice session, I would say, look, make the list of 10 questions, let's say, give it to your consultant, tell them to shuffle them and surprise you, and add one in the middle somewhere that you're not expecting, so that you do have that practice of answering those questions within 60 seconds, 90 seconds, 2 minutes, so you can take notes, so you can practice and get to that thing. Ultimately, for every topic, you want to have a couple sentences that distill exactly what you want to say, right? So it's like, if the issue is, healthcare access, you support Medicare for all, any question about healthcare, you want to tie it back to the sentences that you've prepared, articulating why it is that you support Medicare for all, or why Medicare for all is a solution, right? As just a broad example. Something like that, right? Those few sentences for each subject that you're going to be asked about in your election. If the issue is going to be traffic, what you're going to do about traffic. All right, what are the 2 or 3 things that I want to make sure the audience hears about that? So regardless of how the moderator phrases the question, you're able to go back and say, this is what the message that I have on this subject, and this is what I want to do about this issue. And that's really key. And then don't memorize them like a script, because then you're going to come off robotic. Memorize them generally, right? Know what they are, but you don't want to come off as someone who is over rehearsed. So I only say do only 1 or 2 days of practice. You can over practice and come off mechanical. You don't want to do that. You want to be natural, and you want that delivery to come out natural. Do not feel pressure to say things exactly as you said. Exactly as said in rehearsal. Just get those points across. Know your points, get them across. And that's really, that's really the key, that practice and knowing those points.
Yeah, know where you want to go versus exactly how you're going to get there, I think is sort of the theme.
Mm-hmm.
And Marcus brought up a good question that I want to flag, which is, how do you handle a question maybe that you weren't prepared for, whether it's a member of your community asking it to you, or a member of the moderators, or a member of the editorial board if it's a journalist. I think, and also, how do you maybe prevent that situation from happening? I generally don't think there's a huge issue in saying, listen, if someone asks you a question about whether it's maybe a federal issue if you're running for a local office, or an issue that's sort of not central to why you're running, rather than saying something along the lines of, oh, I don't really have a solution for this problem, more just saying, hey, listen, that my campaign is about this, and this is what I'm focused on. And hopefully it's in line with sort of the core issues that the debate is about, because oftentimes they'll give you enough resource to kind of prepare. But I've been in situations where we were doing a campaign and we were really prepared to talk about, let's say, 3 specific issues. And then the day of the debate, there was breaking news, and that got worked into the debate that we just weren't as well rehearsed on. And so what are sort of the best practices, to try and maybe get out of that situation, and also just pivot back to why it is that you're running in the first place?
Yeah. So, you mentioned basically 3 different audiences. And so first, with the voter, if a voter asks you a question you don't know the answer to, be honest with them, right? You're at the doors, you're in a community, just say, Honestly, I haven't done a lot of research on that yet. I'm still learning about all the different issues. I'm running because of these, and this issue. But what do you think? Right? Throw it back at them. What do you think? And let them articulate what it is that they want, because they're bringing up an issue because they want to talk about it. So let them talk about it, learn from them, hear what they have to say, figure out where you sort of fit into it. And then ultimately, if they do ask questions and they want, and if they end with, look, I'd really like you to do something about this, or I'd really like you to, get back to me on this, get back to them on it, do some research, get their information, follow up, because voters are the people you are responding to. They're the ones you're running to represent. At the end of the day, they're the ones who matter. Your constituents, you're the ones who should matter to your elected officials. And by the same token, the constituents are the ones that should matter to you. So that's one. With newspaper editorial boards, it is fair to go to them and say, I need to do more research on that issue. Not really sure. My focus has been on this and this and this, and this is why I'm running, but I do need to do more research on that. And they'll move on. They'll be like, okay. Unless, I just can't imagine them being snarky. Like, it's just not that. In a debate format, however, you do have a risk of snark from your opponent, potentially, for not knowing an issue. But it's similar. It's a similar message that is a little bit more about pivoting back to the issue you care about, right? And the issue that you know about. And so, they ask you a question that you don't know. Find a way to pivot back to a peripheral issue that is close to it and your message generally, right? So they're asking about something. It's hard to imagine without it, like without an example, but like if you're running for city council and they ask you about it, like let's say like there's a specific wastewater situation, a specific lake, right? And they're like, what are you going to do about this community in this lake? And you don't know about that. Like you have a canvas in that area. You don't know. Tell them you'll do your research, right? And be like, look, I'm running. I'm still learning a lot. The reasons I'm running are this, and this, but that's an issue that I'm eager to work on, right? It's an issue that I want to work on and that I want to learn more about. Be proactive. Show that you are proactive, that you will be proactive. The worst thing you can do is try to, for lack of a better term, sort of, nonsense your way around it, right? Try to play it off like you know what you're talking about when you actually don't. They'll see right through it. And so you want to make sure that you're just being earnest and just knowing that, look, that's something you want to work on. Something I need to learn more about, something I want to work on. If it is something like this example of like there's a wastewater issue at this specific lake in this specific neighborhood, then it's like, look, you can't speak to those specifics, but you want to work about in the environment, right? You want to make sure that everybody has clean water. Shift to your general message, pivot to it, and just be really thoughtful, but bring it back. And that's why, we talk about it a lot, but that message and those sound bites of why you're running and who you are so, so important, because you can literally be asked anything and bring it back to it. And the difference between just like a career politician who only speaks in sound bites and a real public servant, though they may sound similar sometimes, the public servant is actually going to do the research afterwards. You're actually going to follow up. You're going to learn because you don't want to be in that situation again. The question is going to come up again. You've been asked about it once already. Do not be unprepared a second time. Because public servants, a true public servant, is ultimately going to be learning every single day. You cannot be expected to know what every single problem in your district is, in your constituency, in your city. But what sets you apart from other career politicians is that you care to learn every single day and you're learning every day and you're conveying that in that answer, in that message. I'm here to learn and grow and become the public servant that I wish I had,
Yeah, and I think there was a question that came up from Bill, which is specifically around gaslighting. And I think that does often happen, specifically in a dynamic when you might be running up against someone who is sort of entrenched in office, right? You have the audacity in the minds of this person to run up against the establishment, whether they're a elected official or someone who is being supported by political people. where they almost try and deliver contrast by almost pushing back on your ideas in a way that causes you to maybe doubt yourself, or they try and knock you down a peg. And just answering the question directly, I think that it is a tactic that occurs, especially from incumbents, oftentimes delivered in a way that's perceived as arrogant from people, right? And I think the best thing that someone who is preparing for debate and running up against someone that they know has got a record is to prepare for it, right? Prepare for not necessarily an attack, but for someone to try and I used to call it big dogging, where they like kind of look down on you and say, no, you can't possibly know because I've done this way, and lean into it and say, listen, we have a difference of opinion on this issue. At the end of the day, if everyone agrees that your solution is the best solution, you're gonna have a good night on election night. But I'm hearing from my community, I'm banking that voters are looking for something different. I don't agree with your policy prescription. I don't agree that there's a one size fits all solution and that there's only one right answer to a complex situation, and that I'm running for this very specific reason. So I think it's important. It's an opportunity to allow you to stand your ground, to deliver pushback with some confidence. And the best way to defend against that sort of tactic is just by being prepared and by understanding what sets you apart from the person you're running against. I also saw a question from Marcus specifically on complex policy initiatives, right? Like, or complex subjects, mental health, or is certainly, I think, a prescient one, something that people are talking about a lot right now at the national level. But there are plenty of complicated issues that might be hot button topics. And that can be a little uncomfortable to sort of wander into in a debate format, especially if it's brought up by a moderator or someone who's sort of trying to pin you down on a position. So less focusing on maybe a complicated issue where there's a whole lot of strands that go into it. But I think it speaks to a question that, or a topic of debate around, well, how do you answer a particularly difficult question, right? Something where you see that someone's maybe fishing for an answer to fit a narrative that they want, or just a question that you can't possibly answer in 90 seconds. Alex, how would you approach something like that, a quote unquote difficult policy question?
So with difficult policy questions, acknowledge that it is a difficult policy question first, right? When we're talking about mental health, right, which is the example that I gave in the chat, it is a complicated topic because there are lots of different solutions for lots of different people. Say that, name that, right? And if it is an issue that you're running on, take 15, 20 seconds as you're saying that to be earnest about why this issue matters to you, right? Like, is it because of a friend, somebody in your family, a quick 10, 15-second anecdote? This is something that my uncle's in the military. My uncle's he's a veteran. So, it's like something my uncle has dealt with, and this is what matters. And it's a complicated issue. It has a lot of different solutions, and you want to work with everybody to solve this problem, right? Go back to the framing of the candidate that you are and who you are and why you're running in the first place and what you want to do about it, but not the specific policy solution, but rather the process, right? Because the process of solving this issue is bringing people together, including people who are struggling with this issue, local government, resource providers. You want to bring them together to address these issues, right? Shift from actual solutions to the process to find the solution. And that is a way in which you can address sort of any complicated topic, right? Not what I'm going to do to solve it, but how I'm going to work to solve it.
Yeah, it's a tough thing, right? Answering a complicated policy given 90 seconds. And I think part of acknowledging the format of a debate is that you're not ever going to possibly satisfactorily take a complicated issue, whether it's if you're running for a federal office, for example. I'm sure on the debate next week, immigration as a policy is going to come up. I don't think anyone's anticipating that debate to end with a whole new policy prescription around immigration that's been totally never thought of before, and that is going to turn into law the next day, right? There are complicated issues. Debate formats are not necessarily the opportunity to have a nuanced policy conversation, though I think a lot of times that is what folks come into preparing for. It's really an opportunity to reinforce why you're running and sort of how do you solve problems, right? That's ultimately what the goal is, to say this is how I would handle this situation. Um, I want to talk a little bit about post debate, right? And for candidates who are maybe they've run before or they're running this year, I think what people find is that you go into a room, you know, especially if it's a local office where maybe you've got 50, 100 people tops, with a local organization or a local newspaper sponsoring a debate, and they're thinking only about what am I going to say on the evening or what am I going to say to the people in the room. But what is the best practice and how important is it to be able to be prepared for and also execute on the post debate strategy? How do you get the most out of a debate for the people who maybe aren't in the room or aren't streaming it live?
So number one, make sure you have someone in the audience recording the debate independently, right? Just someone that is in your team that knows that is going to do that. Think about the message you want to convey and the issues you want to talk about. And you want to make sure that clips highlighting those issues, right? So you're playing this ahead of time. Clips highlighting those issues are cut from that video. So you can begin to share them on social media over the next few weeks. You want to send out a press release afterwards announcing you won, whether or not you won the debate. Maybe there's a straw poll and you lost, but it's a way, you know, engage your press list. But share that debate, share those clips, share those moments that were really important to you and that really set you apart and that highlight your message and highlight your reasons for running. And just you're planning for that. So the fact is, on the day of the debate, not a lot of people are going to watch, right? Especially for city council. It's going to be, if it's in public, you know, 20 or 30 people in the room, maybe a couple dozen people, maybe a couple hundred streaming it. Depending on the size of your city, maybe it'll be a few thousand. More people are going to watch it afterwards, and they're going to want to watch clips afterwards. You know, so watch the debate afterwards, review it, pull out those sound bites where you really got your message across. Not where you attacked your opponent or, you know, said something snarky or something funny necessarily. Hopefully you haven't done that anyway, but the point where you're like, you know, when you're talking about you know, more parks in the city and then the audience claps, like you want that too. Are there moments where there were lines where you said something and the audience became engaged? Can you cut those clips out? But sharing those clips, press release on social media, and not you know, forever, but for the next week, right? For the next few days. You know, you want to send out an email blast as well. Hey, watch me on the debate. I did amazing. I got to talk about these issues and really made a good point. Make it about yourself, right? You don't want to, unless your opponent makes a truly epic gaffe, like something that is disqualifying. They say something totally out of pocket, inappropriate. You do not want to talk about them at all, right? It's one thing, and if they do say something like that, you may not even have to because of the press. We'll just run with it. You want to make the debate about how great you did. That's really the frame. I was amazing in this debate, and here are the clips that show how amazing I was. Here are the moments, the points that I made. And it's the kind of message that highlights you as, again, the leader this community needs, you know, not just a member of this community, but someone who can actually improve the community, make it better. You're building that confidence, instilling it in your supporters, instilling it in your voters. You know, and if there's really good clips where you feel like there's an issue that resonates with voters, that might lead them to, or contributors that might lead them to contribute again, bring that up as well, right? Maybe you do a fundraising email about that. But really just focus on that following week, right? What am I doing over the next few days on social media, an email with the press to follow up and really highlight how awesome you are, how awesome you did, how awesome you worked. That should be the key focus. So every time somebody sees something about the debate, they're like, oh, you know, they did great. You know, like Melissa's right here in front of my screen, like, oh, Melissa did great. You know, and they just know, and they can point to a clip and say, look, Melissa, look at what she did. She did great. Because you're putting that out there, putting it out there. And so that's really the goal. Share that, help to spread it if you're on TikTok, little TikTok clips as well. whatever you can, over the subsequent week. But after that, it's going to be history. It's going to be old news, and you got to pivot to the next thing.
Yeah, I don't know if I have much more to add. I think the point to reinforce, right, is that uh, being prepared for what's going to happen after the debate is really important. Being able to think about what you want to get out of the debate. What does success look like for me? What do I want my community to learn about me as a result of this experience? And then after the debate, having assets, really, whether it's clips from the debate or written content that you can say, hey, I said this and this is why it's important. But you're just using this to amplify what happened for the people who didn't watch it. And for those people who only watch 30 seconds out of an hour debate, which happens a lot, how important are those 30 seconds? What is it that they need to know about me that they otherwise wouldn't have seen? We're going to get into, I think, Q&A in a few moments here, but we talked about a lot. Alex, I want to tap you first to wrap it all together. Are there any sort of moments, right, for those people listening that maybe they want to review on their own later, or just moments in your experience, whether you were on the campaign or you were the candidate yourself, or you were just watching at home, that sort of tie this all together, that stand out as a really well done debate that can be a guiding light for folks who are interested in learning more?
You mean in terms of like debates of other candidates, like presidential candidates, or like from my own experience?
It can be either. Honestly, anything where you said, "Wow, that was a really effective debate performance."
Yeah, I mean, look, we were talking about this earlier. Though I am not a fan of President Reagan, his 1984 debate, where he really handled the issue of age extremely well. Um, he was at the time the oldest president up for election. He was 73 years old, a record we've blown past in the past decade with our last two presidents. And he was really criticized for it. He had a debate performance where he rambled. He was trying to talk about the military and defense, and the answer made no sense. And it really became an issue. But then he came back in the subsequent debate and was able to make a joke, flipping it on his head against Walter Mondale, basically saying, I won't I don't want to make I don't want to make age an issue in this election, and I won't use my opponent's age and experience against him, right? Attack him. It turned into a joke. Mondale had been a senator for a decade. He'd been vice president. Like, he was experienced. But it turned into a joke to where even Mondale laughed, the moderator laughed, the audience laughed. And it reminded the audience and the viewers and the voters why they loved Reagan in the first place. He was an actor. He was folksy. He seemed just like a very cool, down to earth guy. He was a cowboy in the movies. And that moment was so effective, and it was just a very good crystallization of his appeal and his charm. And it was also a very good moment just from a technical debate standpoint, because it completely neutralized a major issue, right? Just completely, just the issue went away. He won with 59% of the vote, won every state except for Minnesota and DC. It was a landslide. And so those moments where you're able to neutralize your negative, spin it into a positive, and remind voters of why they like you and why they want to vote for you. That is just a very rare, special moment of success that I think every candidate would love, would dream of having. Absolutely.
I've got two. I'll share. One, I was a candidate I was actually working with at the time. He was running in the state of Maryland for the U.S. Senate as an independent, and we were fighting. We had to fight for these debates. Hopefully, that's not an experience that anyone here runs into. But we worked really hard to have a debate, and our opponent was a longtime Democratic political official. He wasn't interested in debating. He thought he had the election in the bag, and they scheduled this debate in the middle. We went on in the middle of the first quarter of playoff football. The Baltimore Ravens were playing the Cleveland, couldn't have been Cleveland. I think the Cincinnati Bengals, maybe. I can't remember the team they were playing against, but it was very obviously intended to be in the middle of a moment where no one would be watching. And we kind of called that out. We said, listen, this is an important conversation that we're going to be having here. And it's sad that the powers that be chose to frame this debate at a time where intentionally no one would be tuning in. And that was an effective thing because it made it seem, and it was in the case, that the candidate was dodging the debate and only reluctantly got on the stage at a time where he knew he had sports cover. And that turned out to sort of rattle the candidate, and it gave us a position of confidence going in, saying, look, we need to have more of these conversations. And we ended up having an extra debate out of it too. The other moment, and I am in all candor also not necessarily a fan, but I remember watching a debate that featured now Senator Josh Hawley, who a Republican senator from Missouri. He was running against an entrenched incumbent, a Missouri Democratic senator, and he came in very evidently with one message that he really wanted the audience to take home. And it was a big race. Not a lot of people, I think, were probably watching the debate in the moment, but it's a Senate race, expensive race. It ended up going viral after the event, which was no matter what the answer to the question, he tied it home with, and this is why we don't need, in his instance, more Washington liberals. He was a very conservative senator. Everything he said ended up with no more Washington liberals. And that was really effective in his community. And he tied it to every single issue, whether it was healthcare, foreign policy, the economy, transportation. They talked about, I think, soybean imports. You would never think that's necessarily a political issue. And somehow he found a way to bring it back to his core mission and the contrast that he had defined between himself and his opponent, which is, I'm not a Washington liberal, and she is. And it wasn't the quality of the message. I'm not saying that one thing is good or one thing is bad, but his exercise and repetition really drove home in the minds of people who maybe had never heard of either of these two folks. They only had to decide, do I want someone who is or is not, in this instance, a Washington liberal? And he did a very good job of sort of defining the battle lines. And then it was willing to bet that more people didn't want it than did. And so it's an example of repetition and consistency and discipline, being able to identify your core reason for running and tie it into all of the answers that ultimately you're going to give on the debate stage. We have covered a lot, from what you do to prepare for a debate all the way through how do you sort of land the planes once you get off stage. I want to open it up to Q&A. I'm sure there are questions, especially from candidates who may have been invited to a debate already or a public forum and are mulling how to best prepare and what to say and how to really make this sort of opportunity a successful one. If there are any questions, feel free to ask them directly of us. Also, I'll add, if you are running for office, myself, Alex, we're always available to have these sort of conversations. If you've got specific questions that for whatever reason you don't want to ask here, send us an email. If you have debates that are coming up or public forums that you're coming up, we're happy to have these conversations and make sure that all of our candidates are really prepared for when they have these opportunities. I see a question from Mike, which is, what's the most effective AI tool that Good Party offers? It's a good question. We offer a whole suite of sort of templates and outputs in our Good Party AI campaign tool. In fact, there is one as well for talking points, essentially a prompt that you can offer around debating. So if someone is looking for support, maybe you don't have someone full-time on your team who you would want to help plug in and prepare you for a debate, though you certainly can do it with friends and family. I've done it many times with people who are not necessarily political professionals. The AI tool is a really good resource for this. You can go into the AI campaign tool, plug in a couple of the key issues that you care about and give it the debate format that you might be going into. And it'll help give you sort of a baseline of how you might want to phrase some of your issues and what to cover.
Yeah, and one thing on that note too, usually you are able to see, especially with newspaper editorial boards or old debates with specific organizations, they're old debates, right? They might be on YouTube, they might be behind a paywall or on the website. Look at the questions that were asked previously in similar races, and put those questions into the AI tools, use those questions to rehearse, practice your talking points. The AI tools can help you summarize your message, really help you frame your candidacy and why you're running in a way that can resonate with voters.
I think I saw Eric with a hand up. Certainly, Eric, you can ask the question if you want to come off mute.
That'll be quick. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, quick question about in regards to, like town halls and when you're in group meet and greets, the importance of, making sure you're rehearsed and prepared versus reading from a script or a piece of paper while you have people in front of you. Can you talk to that and just make sure that you draw attention to that as well?
Alex, you want to take it?
Yeah. So, the thing about as an audience member, that people don't like what people reading from paper is it does seem inauthentic, right? It seems like you're inexperienced. It seems like you don't know your talking points. And so that's why that rehearsing your issue stances, rehearsing what you want to say about each issue is so, so crucial. And ultimately, you don't want to be relying on notes. The worst thing you can do, especially on a televised debate, is be seen flipping through papers. Voters are immediately turned off by that, even though those papers mean you are prepared, right? Those papers are giving as a fact, they are conveying the opposite message, right? Factually, you have prepared, you have your talking points, you have your notes, you're ready. But as a practical matter, an audience watching that is like, that person doesn't know what they're talking about because they haven't memorized anything. Remember, public servants, you're held to a higher standard. And knowing your points, being able to pivot and communicate effectively is part of that higher standard without notes. And so, I mean, it's really important. And it's one thing too, the importance of voter contact and canvassing. That is your opportunity to really hone your message every day. When you're out there talking to doors, when you're out there talking to voters at the doors, when you're at public events, right? 4th of July is coming up. When you're at your community picnic or you're tabling somewhere, you're at a house party, that's your opportunity when you're meeting new voters to also practice those points, practice what you're doing, and really practice staying on message because you are going to get ridiculous questions, especially at 4th of July barbecue. There's a high probability a constituent who is intoxicated is going to come up and ask you something that is insane. That makes no sense whatsoever. It's happened to me. It's happened to everybody. You want to be ready to be able to pivot directly back to your talking points, talk about the issues that matter to the community, regardless. And so as you're campaigning, always use those moments so that by the time the debate comes, the debate's at the end of the election, right? It's September, it's October. You'll already know everything in terms of the message that you want to convey. And so you're always, with voters, it's always practice.
Yeah, I would add, we talked about authenticity a lot. I think authenticity is the crucial thing to try and communicate to people. And obviously, if it's authentic, it should be something that is less try and more just comfort, right? Being comfortable in the setting is important, and that only comes with preparation. Being able to deliver answers to questions in a way that makes you comfortable only comes by having people ask you questions, like Alex is referring to. And then the other thing is confidence, right? And that also comes just from putting yourself in a position to be asked questions a bunch of different ways and being able to sort of get to the root of what's being asked and then confidently talk about how you think about a specific problem or a specific policy. And I think that those two things, confidence and authenticity, are sometimes undermined by a candidate who is preferring to approach like a note or is maybe fumbling around an answer, or even sometimes coming off overly prepared, right? I think that voters are very keen and looking for people who are very comfortable, who are very confident, who are very authentic to what they believe and how they communicate what they believe. And so the best way to do that is to just take some time when you know you're going to be facing voters in any sort of different forum. Be thoughtful. Don't feel like you have to rush through an answer. Be deliberative, and ultimately try and communicate that these are the things that you care about, and this is why you're running, and this is why you're the best choice in any given election.
Absolutely. Yumi, I saw that you had unmuted. Did you have a question?
Oh, yes. I do. I have a question. I can't get my video on, but this is my third election, my second time running for mayor here in Hawaii Island. And I was in a debate this last Monday with the Republican GOP, and I had my notes and things like that, and I was the only one who used a podium. and I was a bit nervous, but after a while, things started to just kind of come off, flow. I forgot worrying about how I sounded, and I thought about what people were concerned about. And the people I'm up against are a kind of a corrupt group. It's hard to explain, but they keep getting reelected. They come from former administrations. And so I just wanted to say that I thank you so much for all this advice about rehearsing, because some of these questions will come up, and I think it's important to be totally prepared. But I totally agree with Derek about how important it is to be authentic, because I don't think a lot of my candidates aren't authentic, except for me and this one young lady who's going with, she's against me. But here in Hawaii, we don't get ugly. We stay friendly as much as possible. We try to stick to the issues, and we rarely get personal.
No,
But we'll see. Thank you very much for this presentation. Thank you so much. Aloha.
thank you. And I think we're just speaking to one thing too, is like, as you're talking about, the rhythm, you're speaking from the heart, right? Like you're running because you care about this community. That authenticity comes through when you're speaking from the heart on these issues. And so when you are asked about, for example, in Hawaii, wildfire prevention, you're able to speak from the heart about it. Like, communities, people that have been ravaged by it. And the audience, the voters, they want to know that their elected officials listen to them, know about them, and care about them. And so sticking to those points, trying to make those points at times is not as important as really conveying the authenticity of you're a member of the community and you care. And sometimes that's the only answer you need for a debate question.
Yeah, and then another thing I told my audience too is that what's given me the courage to run is that I take care of my husband, who's now in the hospital again. He's an 82nd Airborne paratrooper from the Persian Gulf War, combat vet, PTSD, and we have zilcho nothino here in this state. We don't even have a VA hospital, so I know about the inequities, and so I'm talking about them, because when win or lose, I want this stuff out on the table. Thank you very much. Aloha.
Thank you for sharing. Melissa, I see you've got a hand up. Would love to answer any questions you've got.
Hi, thank you. My name is Melissa Lamatina, and I'm running for City Council in American Canyon, California, in between Vallejo and Napa. Anyways, we only have about 23,000 people in my community. But I saw in the chat, how important is social media? Because I'm relying heavy on it. So, thoughts?
I think it's certainly important. I think when we talk about whether it's social media or going sort of door to door, or even these debate formats, TV ads, they're all different opportunities to amplify your message. And social media is particularly a useful one, because it's something that a candidate or a person, even if you're not running for office, can speak direct to the people who are tuning in, right? And so I think that in the context of a debate setting, social media is a useful asset, because it gives you an opportunity to take the message that you were hoping to get out of the debate, and and highlights from your debate performance and all of the different things that came from a town hall or a public appearance, and then spread it using your personal following that you've hopefully been building up over the course of the campaign, to further amplify that this public debate or campaign forum happened, and here's why you participated, here's why you're running, and hopefully get them to spread the word, right? I think that social media is a really powerful way to continuously reinforce the why behind your campaign. Debates are a great opportunity to utilize social media effectively, because it's an event that people are probably talking about outside of your specific campaign. And combining the two is something that I think is an important best practice. Anything to add there, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the tools in your toolbox, right? Social media is not going to get you to all the voters that you need. There are people that are not on social media. And so it's one of those things that is part of phone banking, canvassing, going to community events, hosting and holding fundraisers and raising money. Like, it's all, volunteer engagement, endorsements. It's all part of the ecosystem of winning. And it's just one thing there. Campaigns flail when they focus too much on social media, when they try to focus too much on making content and having a viral video. And it's like, that's only going to get you a certain percentage of the vote, and on the other side, campaigns fail when they completely ignore it. Running for office and being a candidate, you really do have to be a jack of all trades and be in every single aspect of the campaign process and have your name out there, because you don't know how voters are going to see your name. You don't know how they're going to hear from you. Some of them are going to hear from you because they do watch linear television and they watch the nightly news and they're going to see a television commercial about you, or they're going to watch the debate, which is going to be on, a Sunday at 11:30 in the morning on their local channel in the middle of September. So, and others are going to see you on Instagram. Like, it's different, and you just have to do it all to succeed and get there, because your ultimate goal is you want to be in front of every voter. You want every single voter to know your name in the hopes of getting there. And that's how you're going to get to your 50% plus one.
I'll also, speaking of social media, I'm sure many folks who are on this call have already been invited and are already participating in our candidate community in Discord at goodparty.org. I know Quinn is here tonight helping moderate that. But Discord is a great resource that all of our team uses. It's an opportunity specifically for candidates to continue the conversations about debating or any other candidate programming that we've been doing. And especially as we tee into the summer, I know Quinn just shared the link in the chat here, but feel free to join if you haven't already. Please do. If you ever have any questions as you're going through the process of preparing it for a public appearance or a debate or town hall or anything like that, any questions that you think others might also be mulling in the back of their minds or going through the same experience, feel free to use it as a resource. We encourage you to do it, right? I think you heard on this call many times, Alex or myself refer to sort of the kitchen cabinet as candidates are preparing for these debates, or even relying on supportive consultants or campaign staff like Alex and I both were in our sort of past lives before coming to goodparty.org. That is something that sometimes isn't always available to folks, especially if you're running locally. I think the Discord is a really great opportunity for candidates to sort of coach each other up together, talk about the best practices, talk about the experiences that they're having in the political campaign space. And hopefully it's something that, especially when debate season turns around, is going to be a really active and lively place, because I think all of you can learn something from each other. We'll be in there as well, making sure that everyone is having a good experience and feeling prepared for their specific debates. But I hope you guys can use it to the fullest extent possible and are able to connect with each other, because it's sometimes a lonely thing running for office, and there's nothing like dealing with another candidate who is in it for the same reason that you are, even if they're running across the country, being able to support each other in that way.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I just before we close, I just want to speak to Mike's question in the chat, because I think it's a good point to just think about, creating clips about your opponents that make them look terrible. One thing you don't want to do is be Mr. Negative, right? Or Mrs. Negative. You don't want to be the negative candidate. You want to be, as a candidate, of sharing a positive vision for your future, right? If your supporters, if your allies, if your friends want to do that and share those videos, especially if your opponents have said or done offensive things, egregious things. I was in a 5-way primary in 2020, or 6-way. And one of my opponents had he had a very terrible domestic violence charge. And a lot of my supporters asked me about it. And I said, look, like, he did his time and that's it. But if other people want to talk about it, that's on them. You want to focus on your message of positivity and positively improving your community. Because if you're too negative, especially in a multi-candidate race, there will be other people that will go. And I'll give a final example, which is the 2004 Democratic primary in Iowa. We had Howard Dean, Dick Gephardt, John Kerry, and John Edwards. Dick Gephardt and Howard Dean went hard at each other. And what that allowed was for John Kerry, who was third in the polls the whole time, and for John Edwards, who was fourth in the polls the whole time, to come up and just slide into those top two spots and then eventually become the 2004 Democratic primary ticket. You don't want to end up in that sort of situation. Your message is one of the only things you can control in a campaign, right? You can't control what other candidates do. You can't control voter behavior. You can control your message, though, and you can control what you do every day. And you want to make sure that message is positive, and effective and powerful, and makes people want to vote for you based on who you are. And so it's just something to be mindful of, just as you're communicating with voters and on social media.
I think we've got one last question here from Eric. Yeah, there's the question of, I think, PACs are sort of outside entities going after candidates or going after you. It's it's hopefully something that is not occurring too much unless you're running for sort of big powered federal offices or state and local offices that are in maybe larger races. I don't want to get too deep down a compliance rabbit hole here, or the relationship between campaigns and independent expenditures. But generally speaking, to the extent that, let's say, you have people who are asking for your opinion on your opponent, or maybe that there are people, and maybe it is happening in your race, right, where there are political action committees that are wading into the war, and there is no compliance burden where people are asking you questions about sort of how you want a message, right? Which sometimes is not allowed, maybe in other situations or with different entities or organizations it is. I would definitely look into that before trying to sort of coordinate. But I think generally speaking, it is something that can get back to the candidates. Being involved with or having a notable organization that is affiliated with a campaign or a candidate smearing an opponent, something that rubs voters the wrong way. You see it certainly at the big ticket sort of presidential elections, where independent expenditure organizations spend a lot of money, and the candidate kind of raises their hand and says, "Oh, I didn't authorize it. I had nothing to do with it." But people can kind of see through it if you're able to control it, or even able to put a stop to it by publicly saying, "Listen, this is not how I feel about this person. I don't want to be involved in smear tactics." I think generally is the best practice. Eric, I think we can take the specific instance where maybe this is something that's happening to you in real time. We can talk about it offline. But generally speaking, it's not generally a good look for candidates to be, seen directing traffic towards an opponent, using any vehicle, even if it's not sort of their finger on the trigger. And to the extent that you can avoid it, I think it's probably better than not.
Fine.
Any last questions, guys, before we break here? No?
Awesome.
Okay. Well, I appreciate everyone. I appreciate everyone who tuned in tonight. I hope you guys took away from this experience some information you didn't have coming in about the process of participating in the political space. Mike, if you ever need to get a hold of us, you can actually ping us directly in Discord. Alex and I are both active there and are happy to answer questions that you may have for us. Good luck to everyone who's running, who is engaging in the campaign space, especially if you do have debates coming up or public forums or town halls coming up. Hopefully you've got some information now in your back pocket that's going to turn it into a success, even more so than it already would have been. And yeah, we're around. We're happy to plug in and be supportive here at goodparty.org. And we'll be doing more programs like this throughout the summer. So thank you guys for attending. Thank you for coming, for asking great questions. And we look forward to talking to you all again soon.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.